Hi, welcome to Second Samuel 13 to 15. And I guess in these chapters, we kind of begun to see the beginning of the end of David's dynasty, with all the calamity that was, befalling him in these stories. But let's just jump right into it. And the story begins with one of another Tamar who was lovely, beautiful, and treated unfairly. Do you remember the first Tamar? That was the daughter-in-law of Judah, who had married his sons who kept dying, and he kind of treated her unfairly. But yeah, this is a different one. So she was Absalom's sister and Amnon's half sister. They were all children of David. Why he was so infatuated with his sister is beyond me. I can't even explain it. But Jonadab was an ungodly counsel and an evil friend. His plot set in motion devastating events for all of them, and it just made me realize, so we have to always be careful about the people who we seek counsel from and take counsel from, and people that you even just generally let into your, private matters. Amnon was clearly a sport prince, and David, conceded to his whims. That was just very obvious to me. And Tamar was obedient and gentle. I mean, even when he, made known his intentions, she gave him reasonable responses, suggesting even that they may have been allowed to marry, even though this was probably not acceptable practice in that time. But he lacked self-control and forced himself on her. In verse 20, Absalom guessed immediately when he saw her mourning after all that had gone down, what had happened. Immediately he saw her, he was like, has Amnon been with you? Which suggests that Amnon was probably prone to very rebellious behavior and, got away with a lot. Immediately his lust was satisfied. He despised her immediately and kicks her out. This was just adding insult to injury. According to the law, in Exodus 22:16 to 17, he ought to have honored her with a bride price and married her. But instead, he chose to disgrace her and shirk responsibilities. And of course, Tamar was devastated and went around publicly mourning. Now, David was silent in all of this. And even though this event was a fulfillment of the repercussions that we spoke about, his sons turning against him, but also David didn't set a good example for his sons by taking another man's wife with the whole Bathsheba debacle. I believe that his sons just didn't have the right example and were just, and then obviously, taking after their dad and taking up the wrong, traits. Also, having many wives and children, the consequences of polygamy, all running around in the same place, there's bound to be abuse and incest. It's just, common sense. Amnon was the firstborn, and he rushed to his side. This is David, when he heard, when he faked his illness. But he didn't take any action to address or resolve the issue with Tamar. I noticed that, and I was like, David, no. Absalom chose to stay silent also, but he hated his brother in his heart and plotted revenge. Perhaps the murder and rebellion would have been avoided if David had dealt justly with Amnon. This probably made him despise David, and this is Absalom as well, because we will hear, all the things that Absalom does, in the coming chapter. But maybe that's why he despised his father, because he was like, why would you keep silent in all of this? But he hated his brother, he plotted his revenge, and he waited for 2 years. Joab, when everything had happened, Joab used manipulation via the woman of Tekoa to entrap David to bring Absalom home. This was after, obviously, Absalom had killed Amnon and then fled to his mother Michal's people, in the Transjordan. But because he knew, this was Joab now, knew how much the king missed his son, he resorted to manipulation and hired this woman. The woman reminded David of the mercy that God shows to sinners, and of course, David conceded. So this was another point. So Absalom was very handsome, fresh, and had good hair. I mean, if he was in this day and age, having that kind of hair, he would have been, yeah, a good hair donor for the booming human hair industry. He also had a beautiful daughter and two sons, but he named his daughter after his sister Tamar. That was actually good. So we learned that Tamar had to live in his house like a widow and be taken care of just because of what Amnon had done to her. But then we also learned that Absalom is very crafty and he's very patient in his revenge tactics. Now, after David forgives him, obviously he goes and he gets chariots and people and horses and plans treason methodically. I was about to say methodologically. And I'm like, that's not a word. He impressed the people. When he wake up in the morning and go to the city gates and, instead of people bowing down, he would hug them and kiss them. And so he obviously impressed them and won them over. And he pretended to be interested in their problems and always took their side and was saying, oh, if only I were a judge. And people would think, oh, this guy's supposed to be a prince. But look how down to earth he was, not knowing it was all his strategy. He planned to stage a coup and lies to David that he needed to go to Hebron to repay a vow. And then he gathers 200 men, including David's personal advisor and mentor. And of course, David had to flee. Now, this mentor is Ahithophel. And I understand that Ahithophel is Bathsheba's grandfather. So go figure. I don't think it would have taken much to convince him to decamp from David, given all that had happened. David prayed that Ahithophel's counsel would be foolishness and sent his friend Hushai to help him frustrate Ahithophel's counsel by going to Absalom and asking to join his camp as a mole. And then Hushai arrives at Jerusalem just as Ahithophel and obviously Absalom and his crew were arriving. By this time, David had already fled the city because he knew what was coming for him. Now, obviously, this chapter has ended in a cliffhanger, and we'll pick it up. Not tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going back to the samples, but we'll pick it up as we go along. So here's my hashtag getting to know God lesson. God's timing is impeccable. It doesn't matter how many people come together to conspire against God's plan or his people. He is sovereign and he knows exactly how to work things out at the perfect time. In spite of all the chaos going on in David's life, at this point, from what we see, God showed that he was still in control, orchestrating events that even that seemed like, they were like working against him, but we'll see how everything worked together for his good. So thank you for joining me. Cliffhanger, like I said. Tomorrow we're going back to the Psalms, but it will be the Psalms that David wrote in these times, just to make sure that we're following it chronologically. I look forward to seeing you back here. Have a wonderful day. Bye.